So for anyone that's watched my previous videos, I've done an FC Rx7 engine conversion into an Rx8. For those that know the difference between these engines, this does look like an FD engine because the top intake is off an FD, but I've got a CX lower intake which goes from an FC engine to an FD top. It just gives me more clearance running the FD upper. The FC is a little taller and it would have been a little bit harder to fit. So I just got to do a couple of extra things to this car and then it should be ready for a tune. All right, so I'm preparing to get my Rx8 tuned, and I've been informed because I've got the turbo on there that this single oil cooler isn't going to cut it. Mazda did come out with an option for twin oil coolers, and I managed to source that setup. So I'll be removing this and installing a second cooler. Okay, so I've managed to source a second oil cooler. They are totally different, well not totally different, but you can't use a left-hand side oil cooler on the right-hand side because the fittings are on the opposite side, so you'll have to source a right-hand side oil cooler to go on the other side. Okay, so I fitted up the oil cooler, that was pretty straightforward. Now you will need these crossover lines. These are the factory ones to connect the two coolers together. I haven't quite worked out how they fit up yet, but I'll do that now. Okay, so I've installed the second oil cooler. The pipework goes up above the radiator, then crosses over. You remove one of your original oil lines going from the front of the engine to the oil cooler, and the crossover pipes basically go in its place. One pipe goes to the front of the engine, and the other one goes back to your inner cooler. So now I've got twin oil coolers, which should help reduce the heat of the turbo. Okay, so looking in the cabin, I've fitted a boost gauge and controller. I put the gauge in this section here. I've had a 3D printed section made up so the gauge fits in there nicely. I'm running a Microtech LT10S computer. I'll mount that once it's been tuned. As you'll see, my gauges are working. Fuel gauge, got tacho, oil pressure. I'm just going to take it for a bit of a cruise. So the Rx8's just come back from the dyno run. Got a couple of issues that I've got to resolve. The car was only producing 1 pound of boost. My tuner soon figured out that I had forgotten to put a valve seat in the wastegate. Turbo Smart wastegates, I didn't know. There's the valve there. You can clearly see daylight through it. What's supposed to go in there is a valve seat before you mount it on to seal that off. So basically my turbo couldn't spool up because everything was escaping through the wastegate there, so simply just got to put that back on and I should have some boost. Also had a pretty major flat spot on acceleration. I installed all of my injectors on one fuel rail. There's one fuel rail in there, all 4 injectors are on that. The problem is 2 primary injectors are too far up the intake, so a bit of a flat spot, so now I'm going to install just a primary fuel rail with 2 injectors there to try and get rid of that flat spot. So I had a pretty successful day on the dyno, ended up producing 386 horsepower at 12 pound of boost. Once we got to that power, unfortunately my clutch wouldn't hold any more power and started to slip, so pretty well maxed out there. Also, I'll probably look at going into a smaller turbo because the boost didn't really kick in until about 6,000 RPM, which isn't ideal. So a few things I've got to do, but pretty good.